Well, good evening and welcome to our NCS Roundtable discussion on race in America. My name is Jay Helvey and I serve as the board chairman for the Mcclain Society. And on behalf of my fellow directors, our chapter leaders, and all the men who gather at our chapter gatherings, I want to thank you for being part of this discussion this evening. NCS is all about friendship through Jesus, and our vision is to be a welcoming relational network, bridging the divisions in our nation. Divisions such as denominations, professions, age, and race. You know, scripture speaks about the need for wisdom from above and the time for lamenting, mourning, and crying. And I think we're at that place and time in our nation's history. So we're here this evening to come together and talk about it. And it's my privilege to introduce Wylie Mullins, who's going to lead us through the discussion. Wylie's a good friend. He hails from Alabama, but lives in Fairfield, Connecticut. He graduated from the University of Alabama, then went on to get an MBA from the Fuqua School of Business at Duke. And many of you may enjoy some of the products from his successful business that he owns and runs, Uncle Wylie's Specialty Foods. Wylie, more importantly, Wylie has been with the Mcclain Society from the beginning, and he's a leader at our Fairfield, Connecticut chapter. So Wylie, we just really appreciate you leading us in the discussion of this evening with our panelists on race. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited that you joined us this evening. We're going to have a discussion on race in America. It's a topic that is sometimes not easy for people to talk about. And I'm so excited to introduce to you just a great panel of people, all are friends, but they've all distinguished themselves with their work, with their skills and their talents. First of all, let me introduce to you Dr. Carolyn Mckinstry. I met her a few years ago in Alabama. I was hosting an event in my hometown, a lecture series that I host every year, and she was one of my special guests. And we have become very good friends since then. Carolyn actually still lives in Birmingham. She is a civil rights icon, really, in our area. She's an author. Her book, The World Watching, While the World Watched, is a story of the Birmingham church bombing that occurred back in the early 60s. And it's a great book. She received her doctorate in theology. She's a theologian. And I would just like to welcome her to our panel tonight. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Wylie. I'm delighted to join you and your friends.
Thank you very much. And it's good to have you. And of course, my good friend, Bill Mcclain. Bill Mcclain is a fellow NCS leader from down in Winston-Salem. He leads the East Winston chapter. Bill is just a jack of all trades. He's a businessman. He's an entrepreneur. He is a civic leader. He's done all kinds of things. And I'm certain that you're going to enjoy hearing from Bill tonight. And then our final panelist is the Reverend Anthony Thompson. I also met Reverend Thompson in Alabama, in my hometown. He spoke in my lecture series a few years ago. And he is no stranger to the Mcclain Society family. He has spoken at many of our chapters, participated in our programs. He was our featured speaker last year in the at the NCS National Retreat in Orlando, Florida. He hails from Charleston, South Carolina. And Reverend Thompson, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be a part of this. And with God's blessings, we're going to make a real good go at it.
That's great. Well, thank you all. Why don't we just jump right into it? I want to talk, I'd like for us to have a conversation, discussion about stereotypes. People always have stereotypes of people coming from a certain community. There are stereotypes of certain races of people, stereotypes based on our education, all kinds of things. And I would like to start with Bill Mcclain Bill, tell us about your neighborhood growing up, where you come from. What was that neighborhood like? And I ask this question specifically because sometimes we think good neighborhoods are neighborhoods where wealthy people live, and bad neighborhoods are where poor people live. Help us out. Tell us about your neighborhood.
Well, thank you, Wylie. And first of all, I'd like to thank Jay Helvey for inviting me, and Wylie as well. And what an honor to be on the same program with Dr. McKinstry and Reverend Thompson. You know, Wylie, when I grew up in Winston-Salem, and I didn't realize how blessed I was. I had actually a sad childhood. I was the son of a 14-year-old mother. And when my mother had me, my grandparents took me and they raised me. And it was an interesting type of thing, growing up with older Black parents, so to speak. But they loved me hard. And they taught me, and they put me in the Word. They made sure that I understood what that Word was about, because they knew better than I did how much I would need it. Now, both my grandparents worked for R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company. And in Winston-Salem, when I grew up, my birth date is 1947. So back in those days, if you had a job, you did pretty good. And in Winston-Salem, Reynolds was the place to have a job.
Mm-hmm.
Legalized drug dealing is what it was. And I'm just telling it like it is, you know. Of course, I discovered all this later. But my parents worked hard every day. And I can remember when my mother, I saw her wrapping her feet up. It had snowed. Back in those days, it was snow 6 feet high. And she was wrapping her feet up. And I said, Mom, where you going? And she says, I'm going to work, boy. I said, Mom, you ain't going out there in that weather like that? She says, yeah, I got to go to work, boy. And so I said, Daddy, you going to let her go to work like that? And he wrapping his feet up too, you know. And he says, we have to go, because if we don't go, somebody will take our job.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're talking about learning a work ethic. Those are real work ethic. And I looked around in my neighborhood, we had plumbers, electricians, carpenters, painters, automobile mechanics. My daddy was a mechanic. And so we saw all different types of Black people with skills. Now, they didn't have doctorate degrees or masters and those types of things, but they could do things. They made money with their skills, and they taught each other skills, and they taught their children skills.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can remember we had our own bus company. We had our own taxi company. We had our own all types of companies, stores and everything in Winston-Salem. Over 52% of the population of Winston in 1957 was Black. And that was because of R.J. Reynolds. And so in my neighborhood, it was very interesting. We had great schools. I didn't realize how great of schools we had, because our teachers loved us and they loved to teach. And they had relationships with our parents. They didn't have discipline problems in my school, let me tell you. Because my mother made it very clear to me. If they called her off a job for something I did at school, it was going to be something to pay. And so education became very important to me. And that was because it was very important to my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so is that pretty much what you wanted me to share with you?
Yes,
Wylie?
yes, because sometimes people have the impression that Black neighborhoods, it's not much going on. I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying, because I experienced similar types of things in Alabama. What about you, Dr. McKinstry? Would you like to respond to that question?
Absolutely. I have to start with my grandparents. I was born in their house, but when I was born, my grandfather had a college degree at a time when most Black people in particular did not have them, and many of his white counterparts did not have them either. He taught at the local high school. He would later become the principal of that school. His tenure there would be 40 years. And he was also a Baptist pastor. He pastored 2 churches in right outside of Clanton. And he pastored those churches most of his life. My grandmother was a person ahead of her time. She went back to school after having 5 daughters. And again, at a time when people were not going to school, she attended Selma University. And out of those 5 girls, they had 5 daughters. My mother was the oldest. My mother taught 4th grade, continued the tradition of teaching. My father taught physics and chemistry in high school, but my father had a master's degree in physics. And there was never any question in our house as to if you were going to school. It was just where you were going to school. My father was a very strong disciplinarian. He had served in the military. And when he taught school, when we took the same courses that he taught at a different school, he required us to take his test. And most especially if you received an A or B in that course, he says, well, then you should be able to pass my test with no problem. You should do it with flying colors. But education was the order of the day. We had a big set of encyclopedia, which many of our neighbors did not have. But we were in a very humble neighborhood. Many of my teachers lived in my neighborhood. We had other pastors that lived in our neighborhood. When my parents came to Birmingham, my mother was born in Clanton as well. And it's only 50 miles from Clanton to Birmingham, but they moved there for better jobs. And when they did, we joined the 16th Street Baptist Church. And that was the continuation, not only of the religious experience, it was a continuing educational experience too. I could tell you about a lot of the educational things that they did, but my father was really strong on education. We could get money from him to buy a book when we couldn't get money from him for anything else. Not for candy, not for a trip or anything like that, but he was a staunch believer that education, and I think he knew how much we would need that education, how much we would need to be prepared. So there were 6 children in my family. Out of those 6, all 6 have undergraduate degrees, BSs. 4 of those have master's degrees, and 1 of those has a doctorate. So you can see that it was an important event in our home.
Well, I'm so glad you shared that, because so often people don't think, in particularly in Black neighborhoods, and that education is stressed or important. And it's almost like sometimes I've even heard people, when we particularly talk about education, they don't really think of Black communities really stressing education.
That's right.
But I remember a teacher that I had walked into the room, and she met with all the parents, and she said, I will treat your child as a mother's child, because I know every child in this room is some mother's child and deserves to be treated with respect and kindness and with care. And again, you and Bill both have shared stories similar to what I experienced growing up. So Reverend Anthony, talk to us about your neighborhood.
Yes. Well, my father was in the United States Navy during a time when Black men could only be stewards or cooks. However, he stressed to us the importance of education and also work ethic. My first job was when I was 10 years old. My father woke us up one summer morning and told my brother and I to get up. And I'm like, no, Dad, school's closed. We don't have anything to do. He said, yes, you do. You go ahead and work with me. And at this particular time, he was over the Navy's enlistment club in Charleston. And so a lot of sales were cleaning up, and at the end of the month, he was giving them their paycheck. And then I looked at my brother. I said, well, I'm going to get my paycheck too. I said, because we worked just as hard as they did. And my brother looked at me and said, I don't think Dad's going to pay you. I said, well, he's going to pay me. And I stood in the line at the back of the line. When I got it to my dad said, what are you here for? I said, well, I was being respectful, a little shy. I said, well, you gave everybody else a check. I came to get mine. He said, well, who fed you this morning? He just went through who gave you clothes, and it came out to be, well, you've been paid. That's what I learned. That's when I learned one important thing. I'm going to get a job where somebody can pay me because I'm not working for free anymore. And I've been working all my life since I was 10 years old. My dad taught me a lot. He taught me anything to fixing a car, painting a house, doing a yard. I mean, I learned everything from him. And right now, even when I got married, my wife asked me, said, well, what did you marry me for? I don't think you need me for anything. I said, well, yes, I do. But the point being is, he taught me everything I needed to do anywhere. And my mom stressed education a lot. She sent me I went to parochial school all my life, and my brother went to the public schools. And I couldn't understand why that happened. But I remember my brother received a scholarship to go to all-boys school in Tilton, New Hampshire. And he was 10th grade. When I was in 8th grade, I used to do a lot of writing, and my mom used to always come and look at my writings, correct it, and I'll read the stories to her. And I entered a contest for Palmer Writer School. People came and wanted me to finish school there. And I mean, I really wanted to go. I said, well, you let my brother go to a all-boys school in Tilton, New Hampshire. Why can't I go? She told the men, she said, listen, my son's going to go to a 4-year college, so y'all can go back where y'all came from. And so education was a very important part of our lives. First of all, I should have mentioned my grandfather, because my grandfather, and y'all excuse me, I'm kind of screaming because I'm hoarse. My voice is a little hoarse. My grandfather, he owned a little small grocery store in Charleston, South Carolina. And he was the manager of a chemical company during that time where most blacks didn't manage anything. And so through that connection, he became acquainted with a lot of attorneys in Charleston. And so he was able to get almost anything a black person in Charleston could not get. But what he would do, he would share those things with the community. Anything he had that, because the community I grew up in was primarily black community. Anything people didn't have, he would share that with them, or he would find a way for them to get it. So I learned the importance of taking care of our people, the importance of respecting each other, because we had, like y'all, we had an extended family. If I went to the store for my mom and somebody caught me along the way and asked me to go to the store for them, quite naturally, I had to go to the store for them too. It wasn't as disrespectful things that we face with today. You told somebody back then you wasn't going to do something, they'll spank you, they'll send you home, and you get a spanking too. And so I grew up in that type of community. My grandfather also taught us the importance of saving. He would take me and my brother from a very young age, as far as I remember, as being 4 or 5 years old. He would carry us to the bank, and he opened an account for us. And he would give us the money, and we'd give it to the teller. And then he'd give us the receipt and show how much money we have in the bank, but we never saw the money. But when I got older, then he gave us all the money that he had saved up. So he taught us the importance of saving, real importance of saving. And so, my work ethic and stress and education came from my family. Even being a pastor of a church, my grandfather was a founder of Gethsemane Baptist Church right here in Charleston, South Carolina. And of course, we didn't remain Baptist. We went to Reformed Episcopal Church, where my mom and her family grew up in. But I had a lot of excitement as a child. But when it came to racism, I really didn't discover racism until a very older age, because my dad being in the Navy, we were around everybody, white, black, Latinos, Asian, you name it. And everybody was treating everybody the same. And I came to Charleston, South Carolina when I was one summer. I must have been about 10 or 11. We were on our way to a theater, and some white guys threw something at us and spit at us. And I heard the word nigger for the first time. And I didn't know what it meant. I had no idea what it meant. And my cousins, they tried to run the guys down. Then they came back to me and they wanted to know, well, why didn't you, why you didn't try to catch these guys? I'm looking at them, well, what happened? What happened? He said, don't you, they called you nigger. He said, you don't, and I'm like, what's that? So it was late. It was late in my childhood that I discovered there was difference between black and white, and that whites really looked down on us.
Well, it's so interesting, Reverend Thompson, that you talked about the first time you experienced racism. And what was also interesting is that the three of you share stories about your childhood that was not that different than my own. Quite frankly, we had kids in school that were sons and daughters of sharecroppers. We had kids in schools who were sons and daughters of the black doctor, the black lawyer, the black dentist, all of that. In fact, the black doctor lived 2 blocks from the housing project in my town, and we all went to the same church. So we didn't distinguish ourselves based on economics or based on what our parents did or did not have. And it was a different experience. And I asked you guys to share the story because so many of our white brothers and sisters, have ideas about what Black life is all about. And I wanted to make sure you shared your experiences growing up and how they shaped you. Reverend Thompson, you really led us into our next area of discussion this evening. There is so much fear out there on the parts of different races of people. Fear. I even know I live in a suburban town, and whenever there's a discussion of affordable housing for people, this community gets up in arms. You see so many people coming out to the public hearing on affordable housing. And quite frankly, the affordable housing measure here in Connecticut is still high. I think 300,000 plus is quite high for people. But there's always a discussion about, we don't want those people coming into our community. Let's talk about those people. Why is there so much fear? There's a great story in the Bible, Peter and the disciples. The disciples were all out in a boat one day on the water, and they thought they saw a ghost, and they realized that it was Jesus. And Jesus was walking on the water. And then Peter said, tell me to come, Lord, I'll walk with you. And he told him, and Peter started walking. But when Peter realized what he was doing, he started to drown. He took his eyes off of Jesus, and then he started to sink. So help me understand, why do you think there is so much fear against people who might be a different color? Since we're all Black, so let's just say it. People who are African American, Black. Why don't we start with you, Dr. McKinstry?
We can start with me, and the first thing I will say is that I think that fear is reciprocal. It doesn't just exist in one particular community. If I were to talk about the fear that existed during the time of Birmingham, during the season of over 60 unsolved bombings, all of Black homes, all of Black businesses and Black churches, there was definitely fear in the Black communities, even then, of things that we're seeing today being stopped by policemen and so forth. I think a lot of the fear on both sides has to do with not knowing, not being familiar with the community or the individual that you are fearful of. One of the things that I have recommended to the schools and the churches is that we need a curriculum that includes not only the various religious cultures in our nation, but the various ethnic cultures as well, Italian American, Latino American, African American. The more we know about each other, the less we are afraid of each other. You know, I think about the food that we share. Each one of those names that I mentioned, they all have specific cuisine. We have our favorites in our community, Wylie, those ribs and all those things we like to cook. And people generally like that food as well, the soul food. And I think the more we know about each other, the less there is fear. But there is, you know, we must understand there's fear on both sides. I think our diversity is one of the most beautiful things that we have in this country. We learn so much from each other. We can share so much with each other. Our children have just tremendous exposure, educational exposure in their friendships, but also in the schools. And I wish that we could find a way to get that message ingrained in people that, you know, we're all human beings made in the image of God, created in the image of God. And if we would just spend time with each other and get to know each other, I think we could alleviate a lot of the fear. Some of it is based on rhetoric, incorrect statements on both sides, but we just need to move toward each other, you know, get to know who's in your community. Sometimes my conversation when I'm talking with audiences, I will tell them I have 2 daughters, a son. Will this be an issue for you if one of them moves into your neighborhood? And so we have to just be frank in our discussion. And I think if we are sincere and we work fervently with goodwill, I believe that we can overcome the fear that we're talking about. One other thing I would say to you, Wylie, is that we were never taught to fear anybody, even though these things were going on around us, the bombings and things. My parents never said those people, my grandparents nor my parents ever pointed to other people. They just tried to keep us safe, and they continued to encourage us, go to school, and we had better not get in trouble. It didn't matter what anybody else was doing. As long as we didn't get in trouble, you know, everything was good. So I'm grateful that we were not, our heads were not already sort of predisposed to a lot of thinking that may be out there now. We learned so much for ourselves.
Well, Dr. Mckinstry, let me ask you this. I don't want the audience to think that the 4 of us came from just special families, in which we did, but was this the common attitude in your community, people having the attitudes that you've expressed and Bill and Reverend Anthony expressed? Was that common?
It was very common in my community. Many of my teachers lived in my community. Many of the pastors of various churches lived in our community. And, you know, they were right across the street from my mother's house was a female dentist. The first time I met a female dentist when I was 10 years old. And, you know, it allowed me to think, wow, you know, there's a woman that's a dentist in our neighborhood, in our community. We saw some very unusual circumstances there. Many of them were principals, and they were the second set of parents. If we were walking in the wrong direction, you know, not only would they say something, a call would be made to your home, but my entire neighborhood was pretty much made up of professional people. If they were not college educated, they may have owned, say for example, their own barbershop. They may have owned a small restaurant. We had doctors as well, and doctors, of course, practiced only in our communities, but we had them, and they were always willing to answer your questions. You could call them. I think that where we were, there was just a special spirit of striving to make the young people the best that they could be. And not only the parents, but the entire community had a vested interest in making certain that everyone reached their potential and were the best that they could be.
Wylie. Wylie.
Yeah, we lost them.
Did we lose Wylie?
Yeah, sure did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's just keep talking, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to comment, if I might. Dr. Mckinstry, I'd like to move in your neighborhood right now, actually. Sounds like a good place to be. My background is a little bit different.
Okay.
It is a little bit different. First of all, we talked about why folks fear us.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is cultural. They have been raised to fear us.
Yeah.
They have been taught that we're something other than human.
Human.
They have been taught that we are rapists, that we want their women.
Mm-hmm.
These are things that they are taught.
Yes.
Right.
So for them to convert from that brings about fear.
Mm-hmm.
I want to share something with you quickly. I was in the Black Panthers, and I was in the Civil Rights Movement first. I was a leader of the Congress of Racial Equality for Youth.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got older, I got mad because things weren't changing.
Yes.
And so I got involved with the Black Panthers. I was what they call a PIT, a Panther in Training. When I was in there long enough to buy a shotgun, and then they kicked me out because I got a basketball scholarship to a white school.
Oh my God.
But I went to Brevard College, High Point University, and Greensboro College. When I went to Brevard College up in the mountains, now I'm gonna tell you how long ago that was. I was the only black guy on the basketball team.
Wow.
So that was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
When I went up there, the coach, Chick Martin, I love him, man. He sat down. He helped me become a man. Going to that school saved my life. It got me off the street.
Yeah.
But he told me, he says, Bill, everything up here ain't right. And he said, you're going to run into some stuff sometime. He said, if you can't handle it, come see me. But don't lose your temper. He must have said that to me 15 times in the first interview. Don't lose your... He had seen me play. I tried out at the school. And he was just so impressed with me because I was really a football player that became a basketball player. And he was impressed with my masculinity because I was tough. And he didn't have no tough guys on the team. So I get in school and I start working out. And this little white boy would be following me around. And, the first thing, I was kind of homophobic at the time. And I figured that's what it was about. One day I was in the shower. You know how you can tell somebody looking at you, and I turned around, and there he was, peeking around the shower. So I said, hey, man, you need to leave me alone. So I didn't see him for a while. 2 days later, I'm in the shower again after basketball practice. And he is almost in the shower with me, looking at me. I got so mad that I ran down the hall. I'm butt naked, running down the hall, chasing this kid. And he gets to his room and he opens the door. And as he's closing the door, I stick my hand and he slams the door on my arm, on my shooting arm, Wylie. It made me so mad. I jumped on him and I'm wailing him, blood's flying everywhere. And all of a sudden it hit me. You up here in the mountain and you done beat up a white boy. You need to get the hell out of here. So I jump up and everybody's grabbing him and I jump up and I'm headed to my room. I'm still butt naked and I'm still trying to get to this room and I'm starting packing my stuff because I'm thinking I can't get out of Brevard. There's only one bus every day. And I knew these white guys were going to get me before I got out. I'm packing my stuff and I got a couple of boxes done. I hear a knock on the door. I said, I don't have no weapons or anything. And it was the dorm director. He said, Bill Mcclain, come down to the office right now. I said, what am I going to do? Am I going to run or what? I didn't know what to do. I go down to the office. I had just a regular little pocket knife. That's all the weapon I had. I had it in my pocket. I'm sitting in the office with the dean, with the dorm director, with the athletic director, and the basketball coach. All of them love basketball. They are giving me heck about hitting this kid. And so it's another kid sitting there who was his roommate. And so while they're giving me all down the country, I'm trying to figure out what time this bus leaves because I know I got to get out of town. And the white kid says, the reason I'm here because Ricky wanted me to come down here and to say something. I said, oh, Lord, here goes. This is even more. And he says, Ricky wanted to apologize to Bill. And I said, whoa, did he say apologize? He says, yes, Ricky wanted to apologize because he's up in the room crying right now because his parents and his relatives told him that Black people had tails.
Oh my gosh.
And he was trying to see your tail.
Wow.
And he was upset that he had believed that. This kid's 18 years old. He didn't know any better. Now I'm feeling really bad now because I done beat up on a kid who was actually ignorant.
Yeah.
And that's a stereotype that we have to overcome because of years and years of adults teaching kids all kind of crazy stuff about us.
That's right.
Well, Bill, does that hurt?
That tore me apart, man. I felt worse. I felt really bad about hurting that kid. I really wanted to go and hug him because the roommate said he's just sitting there crying. And he wasn't crying because of the fight. He was crying because he realized his people had been lying to him. And he felt foolish that he was trying to see my tail.
So we've got all these stereotypes we have to deal with, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and Wylie, I'd like to tell Bill that my husband served in the Air Force in Korea, and he tells the same story when the plane touched down and they went to the barracks or wherever they were going to be housed, that the people that greeted them in Korea did the same thing. They kept looking at their clothes and trying to imagine where the tail was tucked in. Same story. He told me that.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with all of these stories that people have accepted as facts that we have to overcome and disprove. So, we could talk all night about this, but we don't have that much time left. But I wanna ask you something. Given the attention to race relations currently in America, the protests, the media, in some cases, you see more white people carrying signs that said Black Lives Matters. Respond to that. Are you hopeful what are you hopeful for that will come out of this, and what does success look like to you?
Well, I'm very hopeful. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm very hopeful at what I saw. Now, initially, because it happened here in Charleston too, in a place where I did not expect it to happen, because when we had the Emmanuel tragedy where my wife was killed, we forgave the guy and no protesting, no riots, anything of that nature. However, I'm for protesting, but not the way they initially protested here in Charleston. They rioted the city. They actually broke King Street is our main downtown area, and they broke every window, every business. They broke inside on King Street and literally destroyed the city. And I was so shocked and hurt. shocked and hurt. That part I didn't like, so I talked about it. I published an article in the local newspaper, and I did a video so they can understand, because during our time, we were actually taught how to protest. We were more organized. They actually would get you in one room and literally throw things at you, and hit you upside your head. And if you fought back, well, you couldn't be a part of the protest, because that was the protest, was not to fight back. So I was really upset and hurt about that. But what I did see hope in was diversity. Saw more white people, young white people, and young black people, more whites. And this is where, I see how this country is going to move. It's going to take the young people, because see, our children and our grandchildren went to school, with white children. And so the white kids got to know more about a black child, than what they learned from their parents or their grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Because just like Bill said, Reverend Bill said, they were taught to hate black people. They were taught that black people have tails. They were taught that we were dumb. Anything negative, they were taught that. And this is where a lot of the fear came at as well. Mm-hmm. I remember I preached at a predominantly white church right after the Emmanuel tragedy, and a young lady got up after the message, and she said, and the message was about we are the light of the world and about forgiveness. And she said, Reverend Thompson, I grew up being a racist. And then she explained how she got to that. She started from her great-great-grandfather, okay, and came right on up the ladder to her present parents. And then she said when she got old enough, she realized it was wrong, but she still did it because of her status, because of her friends who were racist, because of any pressure that she received from anything. Mm-hmm. But when she heard about what we did, forgiving Dylan, she was like, I need to ask you to forgive me because I was a racist all my life. She had her two young boys there, and she said she brought them there so they can learn that is wrong. And she said, Reverend Thompson, I'm telling you now, I repent of racism. I repent of racism. But the hope now is that these young people are thinking for themselves. That's what I see. And they're more aware and more conscious of who we are, maybe not entirely, but who we are as black people, because they went to school with our kids.
That's right.
And their parents some parents are still trying to indoctrinate them with that old
That's right.
thing, but they're not listening, because they know better. And that's the hope I see. That's the hope I see.
And Wylie, can I tell you something? I've got 14 grandkids.
Yes, sir.
And the one thing that they tell me is that social media is playing a big role in this. These cameras, they can send it out on social media. People are seeing stuff now that they didn't see before. And when they were told about it, it's easy to say, oh, no, that's not right. The police wouldn't do that.
That's right.
But now when they can see it,
yeah,
it's hard to tell them don't believe your eyes like somebody else told them.
Mm-hmm.
Because they can see it for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Then the conviction comes with the witnessing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Dr. McKinstry, what do you think?
I still think that education is a big part of what's missing. When I was over at Sanford here in Birmingham, there were always white students, mostly male, but they would ask me, why did we see everything in black and white? Why were we always talking about black and white? Why did we make it that way? And I said, we didn't make it that way. You did. And I had a copy of the Birmingham segregation laws, which, we were never in office. We were never able to have roles in the government. So I showed them the laws. And a couple of times they actually saw the Eyes on the Prize series, and they would come and sit and ask, well, I had no idea. I saw none of this. And so I would spend my afternoon sometimes just sitting and explaining, this is what happened when I was a kid growing up. You know, my schools were all Black. We had a bookmobile. And even though my father worked 2 jobs, my mother taught 4th grade, they paid taxes just as everyone paid taxes, but we could not enjoy those things that the tax dollars supported. We could not use the public library. George Wallace made it clear that we could not attend the University of Alabama. The Stanford University was Howard University during that time, and we could not have attended Howard University either. So in addition to a lot of the miseducation, there were a lot of inequities, and this inequity was rampant across the United States. And when we look at the complicity that had to exist for 400 years, if you remember, Nicole Hannah-Jones last year did in the New York Times a piece called the 1619 Project. Yes. And she walked us through 400 years of travel of slaves being brought from Africa to this country. And she told in great detail what happened to them. This is why I say the education is important. Young people, if they're white, will just think that you just chose not to work. You're lazy. You just chose not to do anything. But your parents and your grandparents may not have been in a position to offer very much support. Every situation is different. But if we know the history of the country in general, then people won't ask, well, why are they marching now? Well, why were they marching then? These were the questions that I would get from students. I still think that a tremendous gap in what goes on in our country is the education of students. We need not only United States history, we need world history, and then we need world religions, not to indoctrinate, but just for the purpose of education.
I agree.
I fully agree with you. This is awesome. We're going to have to wrap this up in a few minutes. We could talk all night. I'm sure it could be Reverend Anthony. But I do want to hit at one more question. And that is, what would you like for your white brothers and sisters to know about Black people that they may not know? Reverend Anthony?
Yes. I would like them to, going with Dr. Carolyn said, the education part, I would like them to learn Black history so that they will know why we protest. They will know, why we always have to fight to get what we want. It's not because we're bad people. It's not because we don't appreciate anything, but it's because we always had to struggle. And if they can learn our Black history, they'll see from the beginning that it was a struggle in terms of slavery itself. And they'll learn that they are privileged because of our ancestors being brought up like slaves. They inherited that privilege. We inherited poorness. We inherited unfairness. They inherited, the privilege of being able to get anything they want. They inherited wealth, and we inherit quite the opposite. So they need to read Black history so they can understand us as a people.
Mm-hmm. Bill.
Yeah, well, let me tell you what. My grandbaby says to me, Grandpa, you know what happened in 1492? I said, yeah. I said, Columbus discovered he was lost. And he said, huh? It's because part of their whole education is a lie. They are taught incorrectness as if it is correctness. I had to get one straight one time because we're playing basketball and he telling me about all his accomplishments. And I told him, I said, boy, you were born on third base and now you're claiming you hit a triple. Ain't no such animal. You had all that in the beginning. You hadn't done nothing. It was passed on. My folks was trying to feed me. There wasn't no way they could pass on anything to me, but they made sure I got an education. I went to parochial school for 8 years. My grandparents worked like dogs in that factory to send me to a Catholic school for 8 years because they figured the only way that I could get out of that situation was to be educated. And so my concern right now, and the thing that I think is most important for us as it relates to what we're having this discussion about, is that we both educate our white brothers and sisters, but we got to make sure our children are educated. And we can't depend on the system to do that. I'm sorry. We're going to have to make sacrifice, come out of some of these nice cars, get them tutors, whatever they need to survive, because that education, the honest, is not his story, but true history, so they can have a better understanding of who they are and where they came from.
Thank you. And Dr. McKinstry.
You know, I think if I could leave us on a positive note, I see we have been at this crossroad before in our history. And I always wondered if we would rise above it. Most of us are old enough that we are familiar with segregation laws. We've seen some of the things that we read about in the history books. And here we are again at those same crossroads, and the question is the same. Will this become the America that was described in the founding documents of this country? And is that liberty for everybody, or is that liberty going to be just for a few people? I think this is a Kairos moment in our country, a God-ordained moment when we should stop and think and look around and examine ourselves. Examine ourselves. What role can I play to bring all of these dreams and hopes to fruition? What role can I play to make America, to make this country the very best that it can be? So if we can look at it as our moment of opportunity, I think each one of us will reach inside and pull something really great that will help push us forward. And if we're all doing that, there's no way we can't overcome what we have behind us.
Amen.
Amen.
That's great. Thank you. You know, you all have talked about the current situation in America. And as I wrap this up, I just want to say, I hope that this is not just a moment, that what we're seeing now in this country, people walking hand in hand, carrying signs, saying Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace, saying equal justice for all. I hope that this is not just a moment, but rather a movement. But the difference between a moment and a movement is sacrifice. And I want everybody, all of my Black brothers and sisters and my white brothers and sisters who are hearing me tonight, ask yourself the question, what are you willing to sacrifice? And that might be looking at people differently. Because quite frankly, Scripture is very clear to us that we're all made in the image of God. And so if you look at people, instead of saying, I hope we don't want those kids in our neighborhood because they'll bring down our test scores. But if you look at those people as children of God, you'll think differently about them. Also, I want to say this. A lot of you may not know that next Friday, June the 19th, is a special day in African American communities all across this land. It's a holiday. It's Black Independence Day. It's called Juneteenth. June 19, 1865, recorded that the last slave in Galveston, Texas, found out that they were freed. And I want you to think about that, because I want you to say to yourself, now, how am I going to celebrate Juneteenth? And I want everyone who hears me to celebrate Juneteenth with someone different. And to my white brothers and sisters, I want you to invite and get to know some Black people. Maybe you have a friend that's Black, and call them up and say, Happy Juneteenth. I just found out about it, and I want to learn more. Let's sit down and break bread. This has been an amazing panel tonight. Thank you so much, Dr. McKinstry. I am so glad to see you. I love you. I look forward to seeing you again in Birmingham real soon when we get past the COVID crisis. Reverend Anthony, when I first met you a couple of years ago in Alabama, I loved you on sight. It was just, we were brothers, and we are brothers. And Big Bill Mcclain, I got to tell you, I wish I could have played sports under you. I think I would probably be a better man. But this is great. We just scratched the surface tonight. I would love to do future roundtables on race. Perhaps we will. And to my NCS family, thank you for joining us, and our friends. We appreciate, we love you, and we hope this evening has been enlightening. And I'm going to turn this over to Brother Jay now for closing remarks.
Brother Wylie, thank you. Wow. What an evening. And as we said before, you know, just getting together and hearing our stories, it just softens our hearts. And you, the panelists, thank you so much. And, you know, what you suggested, Wylie, about breaking bread, we started doing that in Winston-Salem before COVID-19, making an effort to meet in each other's homes and have a meal together. Jane and I were blessed to break bread with Bill and his wife, Jonette, and some other friends here. And Carolyn, you talked about what can we do? Well, it is what we can do. Just get to know others. People are different from you. And that's why I'm so encouraged, because, you know, friendship with each other through Jesus, you invite Jesus into it, and change can come, justice can come, reconciliation, forgiveness. I think this is a moment we can move forward. And Wylie, on behalf of all the men at NCS, this is a beginning of discussion, and we have to keep discussing and meeting together. So thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. And now, we talked about, I think as Reverend Thompson said, we need the young generation. So I want to invite Philip Watson, who's a leader in our NCS DC chapter, modeling the inclusion we're talking about, someone younger, to close us in prayer. So Philip, thank you for coming and closing us in a word of prayer and encouragement for this evening.
What a beautiful conversation tonight. Thank you, Jay. Thank you to our panelists. If I can, Jay, I just want to talk about washing ourselves in the water of the word. A very short prayer, but I just want to read a few scriptures before, if that's okay, Jay.
That's great.
Okay, just about 5. I'll read them quickly. Hope they minister to you. Romans 12:16, live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. This is John 13:34. A new commandment I give you, Christ says, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Romans 12:10 says, love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Verse 13 of chapter 12 of Romans says, for in one spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all are made to drink of one spirit. Romans 15:5 says, may the God of endurance and encouragement grant you to live in such harmony with one another, in accord with Jesus Christ. Colossians 3:14 says, and above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And the last, 1 Peter 3:8 says, finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, and a tender heart, and a humble mind. God, thank you so much for this conversation tonight. God, thank you for NCS, the vision of Jay and our leaders, God. Thank you for all the panelists tonight. God, bless them and all that they do. Lord, these scriptures, let them minister to our heart. God, if you will, just lead us by your spirit in unity and love, and then the fruit of your spirit, God, in dealing with each other in gentleness, kindness, in long suffering, and peace. God, thank you so much for revealing to us your will in bringing together, making unity in diversity, God. God, thank you for doing that, making NCS an instrument, God, and those of us involved here as your children, Christians across the globe, making us an instrument of that. God, help us to remember how sweet and pleasant it is to dwell together in unity with our brothers. In Jesus' name, amen.
And thank you, Philip. Thank you, everyone.